Tov, today's daf yomi is Bava Basra daf Lamed Ches. We're going to start on the bottom of Lamed Zayin on the base 37b, 2 lines from the bottom. Says the Gemara. First, we want to dedicate this daf to the Shmira for Am Yisrael, Atzah for the Shuyim, and the Yeshua for the Chayolim. Daf yomi tells us that Amri Nardai, that the people from Nardai taught Haiman Dezabin Diko Achavre, a person who plants who sells a palm tree to his friend, Kaniwe Mishifue Atahoma, that you don't just buy the palm tree, you buy it all the way from the base of the palm tree all the way to the depths of the ground, meaning to say if you wanted to dig underneath a mikvah, underneath your palm tree, you could do it because you bought those rights. Meaning, Rashbam says, Svasa karka at the home shall karka, from the edge of the ground all the way to the depths. And even though it's a single palm tree, and we're going to state in the Mishnah that even if you buy two palm trees, you don't get the property. That's with respect to the area around the tree that you don't get it. Like, for example, if you have three trees, you get the land in between them and a certain amount outside of them. But underneath the tree, you always get. Because since a tree, says Rashbam, is meant for its fruits, and therefore you want the tree to be able to last, and it lasts from the ground. And so therefore you get the tree and what's underneath it. And significantly, says the Rashbam, even if the tree will die, you'll be able to plant another one in its place. And also, so that's basically it. That's what the Naratai said. So Maskef Rava is going to reject this. Rava says on the top of 38a, why does a person, just because he buys the fruit tree, get the rights to everything underneath it? The top of Bava Chesam and Aleph. Maybe a korkama derishki vizil. Maybe he said it's like a saffron garden. Meaning to say there's a type of garden. I gave you the garden I sold you the garden. That doesn't mean you had the rights to the whole garden. It means you have the right to whatever's being harvested there. And once that's done, pick up your stuff and get out of here. So basically, once this tree is dead, you don't have the right to plant a new tree or to dig underneath it. That's not your rights. Just like a saffron garden, once the crops are grown, you have to get out of there. So therefore, Rava says that what do we mean when you say you get the rights to what's underneath the tree? That's where you have the tree for 3 years and you claim I bought those rights. Not generally speaking, you get the rights underneath the tree. Only if you claim that you bought it, then you have the rights. So you have to have a taina and you have a chazaka. So I'm really Markashisha Radio of Kustel Rabashi, the Ikor Kama the Rishka's other way. Okay, so now if you really want to say that you actually if you really want to say that you only sold him the rights to what's on top of the garden, if that's the case, you might have a little method. How can you protect yourself? If like Tosa says, we're talking about a case where the crops take 3 years to grow, and then the guy who bought it could say he has a chazaka when you really only intended to let him harvest there. You're not giving him the property for underneath it. So what can you do to protect your rights? So Gemara explains, you have to register a complaint. You have to register an objection, not a complaint, an objection, that go on record and saying it's yours. Because if you're not going to do that, because if you're not going to say that, this our old friend, the Mashkanta Desura, we had on 35b, we had it all over 5th parak of Bamitzia, this case where basically Reuben lends money to Shimon, and in return, Shimon gives Reuben the use of his land for a certain number of years. That's called a Mashkanta Desura, and that's paying off the loan. So, well, if that's the case, if you're going to have the land for 10 years, how can you establish that person doesn't have a chazaka? And you write in the contract, the kasaba hachi, but mishlam shana ilan tepakar double kesef. When these years are completed, let your land go out without paying any money. Now, ikavish le'lashtar mashkanta. If the guy who lent out the money will just hide the fact that he's just paying off his loan, let's say he says I purchased it, would you believe him there under those circumstances? Obviously, we're not going to believe him under those circumstances. So how do we protect himself so that this person doesn't have a chazaka? Where the rabbis institute something which is going to cause the borrower to lose money because the lender can now claim he has a chazaka on it. So rather, what does the borrower have to do? The borrower have to do? If he enters into this type of mashkanta desur relationship, he has to make a formal objection. He has to register his objection that this other person doesn't own the property, it's just this relationship. He has to make an objection in front of in the manner in which the machaz are made, as we'll see. So now we're up to the next Mishnah. Says the Mishnah, we're talking about the different parts of Eretz Yisrael. So says the Mishnah as follows: Shalosh Aratzos, they're going to be considered to be three different lands in the land of Israel. Hold on. Shalosh Aratzos l'chazaka. That means to say that there are respect to three different lands with respect to establishing chazaka. Again, with respect to living in the property and claiming it's yours because the other person didn't object. There's Yehuda, Avar Yarden, Vigalil. So this week's parsha talks about the 2.5 tribes who lived on the other side of the Jordan River. And we see even in the time of the Mishnah, many, many years later, that plan worked, that they remained a part of the land of Israel, that they remained connected. Reuven, Gad, and Chatzim and Asher. So here we see that there are three lands for Chazakah. There's Judah, Avar Yard, and the Galilee. But they even though they were all part of the land of Israel, Shalosh Artzos l'Chazakah, nevertheless, they didn't have communication so well, and so therefore we were going to see the following halacha. If the guy who's the ma'arer, the one who's making the complaint, the original owner was in Judah, the guy who has the land was in the Galilee, or the Galilee, v'hechzik b'Yehuda, ain't a chazaka, it's not a chazaka, he has to be in the same province with him. Otherwise, we assume that he wouldn't be able to make a proper objection, as the Gemara is going to discuss. Achas, Rabbi Yehuda says no. Rabbi Yehuda is saying, and we'll see where exactly Rabbi Yehuda comes to argue, and he says no. He's arguing. He's saying that there's no distinction about different areas for chazaka, because Rabbi Yehuda says as follows. First of all, Rabbi Yehuda, well, Amru Shalosh Shana, we only say these 3 years. That you need 3 years to establish a chazaka, shana, that only enough so that you could be in Spain, and basically if the hour is in Spain, and then this other guy has the property for 1 year, then after a year they'll go and Yelkuv Yodiu Shana. They'll go and let him know about it for a year. The Yavo Shana Cheres, and it'll come the next year. So therefore you need 3 years. So Rabbi Yehuda is arguing against the Tanakama. He says, we don't care what land you're in for a chazaka. It's always going to be 3 years because that's the maximum amount of time that a person could be away, because Spain is like a symbol of the farthest end of the world that a person will be. And so therefore that's what Rabbi Yehuda is saying. And so Rabbi Yehuda is saying that the reason is not because a person watches his contract or his deed for 3 years, but rather is a person is never going to allow anybody at all to stay on his property, and the amount of time that he can make the objection will be 3 years. But if he would really be in the same city, then the chazaka would be immediate. So now the Gemara raises this question. My kasavar Tanakama. What's the Tanakama's assumption when the Tanakama says that if you're in Judah, you can't make a chazaka in the Galilee and vice versa? My kasavar Tanakama. Ikasavar machal shlo b'fanav. If the Tanakama is in a position that you can make an objection even though you're not in front of the person who has the chazaka, and it would still the ma'arik make an objection even though he's not in front of the person who has the chazaka, then afilu Yehuda v'Galil nami. Then even if it's in Judah and Galilee, it would also be from Judah to the Galilee or vice versa. It would also be able to be a macha, because the person can just stand in one place and make the macha there, even though he's not with the person. So the Gemara says No, and if you're going to be in a position, that, and if you're saying that if you're not in front of him, it's not a macha, then I feel Yehud of Yehuda Namigo. Then even if he's in Judah, he's a different part of Judah and he makes the macha, it wouldn't matter because you have to do it directly in front of the person. It's not enough to be in a different city in Judah. You have to go straight to him. So why does it say as long as you're in the same province, it's a valid chazaka? It should be have to be right in front of the person. Why did it say in our Mishnah, imo b'medina? So the Gemara explains, so no, they are actually in the position that if there's a macha not in front of him, that is a macha. And so if that's the case, why from Judah to the Galilee is it not effective? Mishnah Seinu b'shas chayrim shanu. Our Mishnah is referring to a time of chayrim, to a time where it's very difficult to travel. There's a time that there's a lot of fighting in the world, and there's enmity between Judah and the Galilee. And so therefore, under these circumstances, there's nobody going back and forth, and the objection will not get there, and a person won't be able to guard his contract. So why do they specifically mention the Judah and the Galilee? So the reason is because it's to tell us how Kamashwan is teaching us the Stam Yehuda v'Galil k'shas acherim gamu, that Judah and Galilee, it's always like a shas acherim, that there's never caravans going back. But in general, wherever there's no caravans going back and forth, it's like Judah and Galilee. And so therefore, even if you make the macha shel b'fanav, it's not going to be a macha. But in general, a macha shel b'fanav is going to be considered a macha. So the Rambam, however, writes that therefore, if there was a time of war, v'shibush derachim, and there's no roads going back and forth between the place where Reuven was and the place where Shimon is, and even if Reuven had it for 10 years, we'll kick him out. And Shimon will get his place, because he could say, so basically, because they'll say, I didn't know. So we see that the Rambam is saying that the reason the chazaka is not work is not because the macha wouldn't get them, but because the guy who's the ma'ar could say, I had no idea. So that's how the Rambam understands. It comes in from the opposite direction. So now we're up to the top of Lamed Ches on the base. Amar on the first line. Amar Rav Yehuda Marav ein machzikin b'nichsei boreach. So let's say there's a person who runs away, and now somebody comes into his property and is living there for 3 years. We don't establish that there's a chazaka there. Ein machzikin b'nichsei boreach. It doesn't help. That the fact that he was there for 3 years doesn't help, because the owners are not able to object in front of the person who has a chazaka, and so there, because they ran away. So Kamrisa Kamei Shmuel, when Rav Yehuda Marav went there to tell this in front of Shmuel, Amarli, Shmuel said to me, why? Why is the chazaka not work? Do you think the boreach has to make the objection in front of the person who is the machzik? He doesn't need to. He can make it wherever he is. Rav Ma'kamashwan. So what's Rav telling us? Macha shel b'fanav u'avin macha. Is Rav telling us that this macha of the boreach, since he's not in front of the machzik, it's not a macha? Amar Rav macha shel b'fanav havei macha. Didn't Rav say it is a macha? And Gemara says no. When Rav said it's a macha on the bottom of Lamed Ches Amud Aleph, Rav Taima the Tana Didan Kamafarashlei. Rav was just explaining the position of our Tana Kama. But Rav himself does not agree with her Tana, and he says Macha Shalom B'fanav is lo having Macha, is not a Macha. That's why he says that you can't make a chazaka if the person who owns the property is a boreach. The Ikeda alternative version, Amar Rav Yehuda Marav, Machsikim b'nichse boreach. And Rav says you can do a chazakah on the property of the person who runs away. So Kamrisa Kamei the Shmuel, when it was said from the Shmuel, he said, Amar Pshita. Shmuel says, well, that's obvious because he doesn't need to make a macha in front of him. So of course you can make a chazak on the property of the one who runs away. But Rav Michael Mashlon, what's Rav telling us? Rav just said this on Amar Aleph. He already said this once. Why is he saying this again? The Gemara says, "Oh, Kamashwan." So it's teaching us the chiddush that that even if the macha happened in front of two people, and those two people are not able to go, so that they're not able to go and tell him, meaning to say he made the macha in front of two people who are not able to go and tell it to the machzik, it's still considered a macha, have a macha. The Amarav Anan, because Rav Anan taught the partially minay demar Shmuel, because he says it was explained to me the position of Shmuel. He says Micha b'fnei shnei b'nei Adam sheyacholim homarlo have a macha. So he said, if the owner objected in front of two people, and he could say to them, it is a macha, then it is a macha. So he says, Didim firstly me the Shmuel. Shmuel micha b'fnei shnei b'nei Adam sheyacholim homarlo have a macha. Micha b'fnei shnei b'nei Adam she'eni yacholim homarlo lo have a macha. So Shmuel's of the position that the only way it's a macha that works is if you say it in front of two people who themselves could go and say it to them, to the machzik. But Rav says no, even if they can't say it themselves to the machzik, chavra islay, the chavra islay. The word gets around. Your friend has a friend, and your friend's friend has a friend, and so therefore the word's going to get back. Excuse me. So therefore, Rav is of the position, and even if you've made the macha, like in a dark room, in a basement, in front of two people, that's enough. So So Rava says basically the law is that you can't do a chazakah on the property of the person who ran away because he can't make an objection to you. But then he also says that if the macha is not in front of him, it is a macha. So Tarati, these two seemingly contradict each other. The first approach is saying that the guy who's not in front of you can't be ma'ara, and the second approach is saying that he can be ma'ara. So the answer is Lokasha. They're talking about two different scenarios. That kam borech machmas mamon, kam borech machmas baradin. That if you're running away because you owe money, well then you can make a macha because you don't care if they hear where you are. You're far away; they're not going to catch you to pay them back. But if you're running away because of the fact that the Persians want to kill you, and the people are running away because they're looking for you to catch you and kill you and execute you, then you can't establish a chazakah because the person is hiding out. And so therefore, under those circumstances, you can't establish a chazakah. Gemara says, we'll just do three more lines here, and then I want to do something else. What's an example of a macha? How do you say the macha? That you say such and such a person is a robber. That's not a macha. That's not a macha. Because let's say Reuben's living on Shimon's property, and Shimon says, oh, Reuben's a big robber. Well, it doesn't say anything about the property. But if he says, the nakalei arabe gazlanusa, but if he says Polanya Gazlanu the Nakale La'arai Begazlanusa, if he says if Shimon says Reuven's a robber because he's grabbing my property and he's holding it, or Machar Tavano Ebedina, and the next day I'm going to take him to court, then Avile Chazaka. That in fact is a chazaka. So that's what we need to do in order to establish a chazaka. So. All right, we'll stop the recording here, but I wanted to share something else.